Robert attended Sycamore School from 5th through 8th grade, graduating in 2011. He went to Park Tudor and then graduated from Yale University in 2019 with 2 bachelor's degrees with distinction, one in computer science and one in French. Until the age of 18, Robert worked as an actor in film, television, and on stage. While at Sycamore, his interests in acting, physics, language, and chemistry transformed into a passion for programming video games. During college, Robert began a partnership with a digital artist spanning multiple years, which culminated in his work being featured in museums across Europe. He currently lives in Seattle, working for Microsoft's mixed reality division. He enjoys ski racing in his free time. His late brother, the memorable Matthew, was a member of the Sycamore class of 2013. All the world's a stage, Robert. And now I give you the stage so that you can give us a glimpse into all the adventures of your wonderful world. Thank you.
All right. Okay. Hello, everyone. Thanks again, Miss O'Malley. So, I would like to start with these 2 photos. They were taken in the same city, 20 years apart. On the left, on the right, I'm in front of Notre Dame in Paris, and on the left, I'm in the Pompidou Museum in Paris. I want to talk about how I got from here to here. I had the immense fortune of growing up in a bilingual family with medical and theatrical parents. My dad is a heart surgeon of French ancestry, and my mom is a nurse turned actor. So from a very young age, I was exposed to language, science, and storytelling. These would end up being core themes of my life. Sycamore was a very important place for me because it set up the trajectory for the rest of my early life. I always knew I wanted to go into science. I spent a good month in Mr. Schuth's lab breaking beakers and making his classroom smell like vinegar in an unsuccessful attempt to make hot ice. But I learned the interrelatedness between life and literature. Our curriculum throughout middle school had history and literature developing together. When we would learn about an event in history class, we would immerse ourselves in narratives from that time period. So when we learned about World War I, we would read All Quiet on the Western Front. I learned applicability of literature in life, not only in English, but as I became more serious about my French education. Sycamore is also where my interest for computers became a passion. I wasn't exactly a mathlete, but I hung out with the math crew. And a big thing for us at the time was programming calculators, like the one I have there. And I really liked making interactive animations, symbols bouncing around the screen, little games. And eventually the programs became so complicated that I Googled how to program calculator on computer. And then I thought about it for a second, and then I was like, how to program computer? The ball was rolling by the time I graduated Sycamore. I was programming video games, now with my computer, speaking French, and acting. Programming games, speaking French, acting. Programming games, speaking French. This is Dr. Guffin, who headed the Global Scholars Program at Park Tudor, which is a 2-year research project and philosophy curriculum requiring 100 hours of community service and culminating in a thesis, a research thesis, and a presentation. Mine was about categorizing all the different types of self-deception. So I continued to develop myself in the humanities throughout high school, even when programming started to take more and more of my interest. Mr. Ritz, my computer science teacher, was also a huge influence in my growth as a programmer. And I was still acting. By the time I got to college, this is what my brain looked like: an amalgam of diverse experiences and studies. I did, like Ms. O'Malley said, I did a French major on top of my computer science major. I wrote 2 theses, one in English about computational art, and the other in French about the poet Baudelaire. Still programming games, and still performing on stage. My junior year, I met Hito Steirl, who came to Yale for a few weeks as a guest lecturer. Hito is a digital artist based in Berlin who hired me to enter in a partnership with her, creating experiences in exhibits across Europe. Hito had the full artistic vision, and it was my job to translate that into code. It was the perfect application of all the skills and perspectives I had been building throughout my entire life. So we started with power plants. Power plants is an augmented reality application. So people would come to the exhibit with their phones or iPads, scan in, and then on the screens of their devices, they would see texts suspended in the air. And these are excerpts from botanical textbooks generated by an AI that can see into the future. And this was really great because I had already spent a lot of time programming games, making graphics, 3D graphics, 3D applications, and it continued to be relevant when I went to Microsoft to work on mixed reality. This is Dancing Mania, also known as Social Sim, which is an infectious disease simulator and civil unrest simulator at the same time. It looks immersive. We actually projected the simulation on the walls of the exhibit, and the floor is shiny. So instead of having virtual reality with goggles, you were immersed just by physically being in the space. But what's also interesting about this was that it was running 24/7. And so people would come in and out, and we had to make sure that they still felt something when they came in. They still had an unexpected impression. We have police arresting workers, workers rebelling, this infection spreading, where you can see the 2 symptoms are this glowing effect and uncontrollable maniacal dancing. And so we used randomness to create variability in the narrative, but we had to make sure that it wasn't so random that we lost track of the narrative, that it became incoherent. So finally, I want to talk about prunes. Prunes are randomly generated, artificially intelligent virtual creatures who have to behave within a strict aesthetic guideline. So again, we used randomness to create variability in these creatures. They figured out how to move around through a genetic algorithm, which I'll talk about later. But at the same time, it couldn't get so random that it fell outside of the artistic vision for these creatures. So I've been talking a lot about randomness. What is randomness? Randomness is the expression of hidden or incomprehensible complexity. Miss O'Malley always joked that it wasn't a good idea to define something I don't understand with something I don't understand. So I'll give you an example. Here I have 20 numbers. And I'll give you a second to look at these and try to see if you can find any relationship between the numbers. They're random. They're well distributed between 0 and 9, and you wouldn't be able to give me the next few numbers given these. But in fact, these numbers were generated by a fairly simple computer program. So what I'm trying to show you here is that sometimes randomness is just complexity that eludes us. Humans love mystery. We love surprises. But when things are too random, when the complexity is too elusive, they become too uncertain. And too much uncertainty can be hard to deal with or even understand. So how do we deal with uncertainty? We have 2 ways: science and storytelling. Science is about resolving uncertainty with precise, unambiguous language. It's about removing mystery with things like math. Progress is defined by our ability to plainly describe hidden mechanisms. So, for example, the Navier-Stokes equation is a really elegant way of representing turbulent flow of fluids, something that completely eluded us until we managed to find this extremely elegant, impossible to misunderstand formula. Well, assuming you understand it. But it's beautiful, right? So science is about removing mystery, mastering complexity. Storytelling, on the other hand, thrives on mystery. Stories are better when we are given the freedom to fill in the gaps. So I'm going to show you this video here, and we're going to talk about it afterwards. So, there are two things going on here. One is that everyone in this room took moving shapes and reflexively created a story. We took something that was interpretable, something that is essentially uncertain, and we created a story to fill in the gaps. The second thing is I'm sure that everyone in this room has a slightly different interpretation of what just transpired between those shapes. And that's what makes stories interesting, is the multiplicity of interpretations. We like to share stories because we like to hear what other people think about them. And so storytelling resolves uncertainty in sort of a different way, by creating more distance and creating other types of uncertainty, maybe. So I've talked about these two approaches like they're opposites, but actually in my mind they're quite related. At the top here, I have adjectives that are typically used to describe phenomena in physics: repulsion, reluctance, resistance, rigidity, flexibility, attraction, affinity. But these are also common adjectives to describe interpersonal relationships. So here we have scientists thinking like storytellers. And underneath, I have a quote from Zola, who is a French novelist. He wrote, "I have selected persons, absolutely swayed by their nerves and blood, deprived of free will, impelled in every action of life by the fatal lusts of the flesh. Thérèse and Laurent are human brutes, nothing more. I have sought to follow these brutes, step by step, in the secret labor of their passions, in the impulsion of their instincts, in the cerebral disorder resulting from the excessive strain on their nerves." So that's a super melodramatic way of saying that he has chosen characters, defined their personalities, and has done the thought experiment step by step to write his story. He is a storyteller thinking like a scientist. Digital art uses science to tell stories. Now, I'm painting with a broad brush here, but what I think is interesting about my partnership with Hito was that it was a little bit like a scientific storyteller met a storytelling scientist. We embraced the storytelling in science, and the science in storytelling. But how do we use something that is fundamentally predictable, computers, code, to create something that needs to feel alive and unpredictable? So we return to prunes. Prunes demonstrate emergent behaviors from simple rules. Prunes were initially inspired by paintings from an early 20th century Russian painter named L. Lisitsky. who painted these geometric, architectural, abstract forms. Here I have Hito and my prunes. Hito wanted to use genetic algorithms to turn these forms into little creatures. It was my job to figure out how to write the code to equip them to evolve. So I gave them bodies and muscles and minds. And at first, they really didn't know what was going on. They were struggling to move, writhing around, trying to figure out how to move in a coordinated way. They needed to evolve. So here I have two prunes and their genetic code above them. I place the prunes in their environment, I measure how far they get from where they started, and I assign them a fitness proportional to that distance. So prune 1 traveled farther than prune 2, and so gets a higher fitness. The system then takes parts of their genome, modifies parts of them, but in proportion to the prune's fitness, and then combines their genes to make the baby. So then after many generations, we start to see common biological phenomena like speciation, where a very popular improvement that was found through evolution spreads to other organisms in the group. And so you can see here, these prunes are much better at moving in a certain direction. They have bodies and muscle timings that have been evolved for that purpose. And after many more generations, we get more sophisticated prunes with more complex bodies, and components in their bodies are more clearly dedicated to motion. So for this one, you see the little tail that propels it along. And so, on their own, they may not look like much. But it gets you thinking. What's it like to be a prune? Are they alive? What do they want? If we kept running the algorithm, would they eventually learn to communicate through movement? Could they get lonely? What would happen if you gave them more complicated reasons to survive other than move around? Should we give them the ability to feel happiness? Hunger? If we give ourselves space to observe this very simple system with literary curiosity, we start to see the simulation in a very interesting light. So, you may be thinking, how can I become a digital artist? How can I make people feel with code? Obviously, this part is a little bit more for the middle schoolers. You've all chosen your routes. But I'm still not convinced. I'm still not trying to convince you to become digital artists. But I do want you to come away with an appreciation for the interrelatedness of science and humanities. Two fields which often seem at odds, but can work hand in hand. I want you to think about science like a storyteller, and to think about storytelling like a scientist. I've spent a lot of time in both worlds, and it's permitted me to do interesting things and get to interesting places. Read, watch, learn, think, perform, create. Be a tourist in mystery, and use the rules you learn as a guidebook for eating with the locals. You will build amazing things with a mindset that plays a role in the theatrics of our universe. Thank you.
Before you take your seat, I'd like you to tell them the two interesting anecdotes from Chicago Fire.
Okay.
If you want to see Robert on TV, he's in season 1, episode 8 of Chicago Fire. He happened to leave that out tonight, so I want him to. The middle schoolers loved this.
Okay. Yeah, so the first anecdote is that Miss O'Malley has blessed and cursed me with an encyclopedic knowledge of English grammar, which again has been a blessing and a curse. And script writers are not always the best grammarians. And so my line in Chicago Fire, I got hit by a train, and the firefighters were getting me out from under the train. And my line, as it was written, was me and Kayla were, my sister and me were walking down the tracks. And I'm under the train. I'm like, my sister and I were walking down the tracks. Script supervisor's like, cut! It's my sister and me. I was like, it's my sister and I. She's like, it's my sister and me, or get out from under the train. So yeah, I cringe whenever I watch that scene. But you gotta get paid. But
And the even funnier story is...
Yeah, so I brought the stool out because this is like precisely the stool that was used. So yeah, there's a lot of like crazy scenarios you get yourself into as an actor, and in order to shoot close-ups of my leg in the train, they had to make a cast of my leg. And so my mom drives me to like this rundown building, and we go into like a poorly lit bathroom, and there's a guy in there with like all these things, like all these materials and just stuff that he needs to mix together to make the cast stuff. And so he puts one of the bottles down. I get down on the ground. I put my leg up on the stool, and he's covering my leg. And we get to about 80% there, and he kind of like he looks around for a second, and then he like looks under my leg, and he's like, and he tells me that is the stuff he was supposed to mix in so that it doesn't stick to my hair. So then for the next like 45 minutes to 8 hours, he's ripping this thing off my leg. Yeah, so I didn't have to go back in to do VO. They just took the audio from that, and that's the groans. Yeah.
Thank you, Robert. Any questions for Robert?
So could you talk to me a little bit more about what do you do at Microsoft today?
Sure. Yeah. So I've been at Microsoft for about 4 years, and through the filter of my NDA, I basically work on allowing developers to create applications in mixed reality. Right now, it's super hard to build. Like, if I had a HoloLens, well, there's no picture of like a VR. Oh no, this guy's got one on. If I wanted to build an app like this, where the guy is in VR and interacting with things, it's quite hard, and you need to be a very specific kind of graphics programmer to do it. But really, all we're doing is going, in a lot of cases, from 2D to 3D. And so allowing people who already have a lot of experience building out 2D applications, we want to allow them to build applications for mixed reality. And so I'm building the frameworks that allow those developers to come to mixed reality. Yeah, thank you.
Robert, incredible presentation. Thank you so much. I'm older, and I'm really intimidated by this new horizon of information. I understand there are limits, or we want to impose limits, I guess, on artificial intelligence, at least for now, until we understand better how to use those. But I'm also scared to death, frankly, with what I hear about guardsmen releasing national secrets
Right.
about our
That wasn't AI.
systems.
That was just a guy.
I know, but
It was a guy.
But are there boundaries? Are there, just from your perspective as a younger person really immersed in this field, what are the limits? I mean, what should we be? How should we manage our future in this realm?
Right. Yeah, I kind of have the scary answer and the not so scary answer. I'll try to go somewhere in between and speak with as much authority as I can. I think it is a very interesting time for us because we are on the cusp of another revolution of technology. We will see a new relationship with computers with these large language models, now that they can speak to us as well as we can speak to them. So how to program computer is going to change into, can you help me figure out what I should do next? Some long, very, much more coherent question and answer. So I think with that, computers will find a way to explain themselves to us better. I think there is an interesting development where a lot of the anxiety, I think, comes from, at least my anxiety, comes from what is our place anymore, right? If computers can basically do everything that we can do, like, what are we here for? And the not so scary answer is I truly believe that computers will not become as generally intelligent as us very soon. But I also think that we may start to think more deeply about what it is humans are good at. If a computer can pass the bar, well, maybe we don't need to take the bar anymore,